Morning, we'll be having a review of Nigeria's 2023 fiscal policy measures. And to have this discussion with us this morning, we have Abiodun Kayode-Alli, who's an economist and a tax manager at PWC. Very good morning to you, Abiodun. Great to have you on.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right. Now, the federal government of Nigeria has approved the Fiscal Policy Measures 2023. Now, for short, the FPM 2023, which is dated 20th April 2023, with an effective date of May 1st, 2023, replaces the Fiscal Policy Measures 2022, that's FPM 2022. Now, let's get right into the issues. Are these fiscal policy measures for 2023 all about driving revenue for Nigeria?
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. So, if you think about it, the policy measures actually contain information on import duty rates as well as excise duty rates. And if you consider some of the increases that have been made, especially with respect to items that were initially introduced, their rates were initially introduced to us in 2022, and information had been given to us, futuristic information had been given to us, but there had been amendments in this FPM 2023. So if you put all these things into perspective, one might be tempted to argue that the federal government is actually pro-revenue, right? But if you look at it from the surface, you might want to think that there are other aspects, other motives, such as trying to ensure part of the government's goal with respect to a green environment. So from my own honest opinion, it seems like it's more of pro-revenue. That's what I would say.
All right, thank you for that, Abiodun. Part of the fiscal policy measures basically changing an excise duty rates on items like tobacco and even alcoholic beverages. Can you tell us the rationale behind this?
Okay, yeah, that's exactly what I was actually even referring to when I was giving my first response. So to be honest with you, if you look at Nigeria's situation, because you have the Minister of Finance being like the key driver of this particular policy measure, so you might want to think back about some of the comments that have been made with respect to Nigeria having a revenue challenge, with respect to Nigeria having significant debt challenges. Our public debt is sitting somewhere around 46 trillion, right? So you might want to look into that and begin to understand where some of these initiatives are coming from. So like I said earlier, we had a situation whereby the fiscal policy measure had told us that for tobacco, alcoholic beverages, we had a 3-year roadmap, 2022, 2023, and 2024. Rates had already been given for 2023 and 2024. Now, this change coming at this point in time, I think the only rationale you can give to it is the fact that probably the government wants to generate more revenue. And it might be a challenge for manufacturing companies who are planned based on FPM 2022.
The WhatsApp number is 0809 444 0981. You can also tweet at smooth981. And we're streaming live on YouTube as well, so you can catch the live stream up on our YouTube channel. It's Smooth981 FM Lagos. Once you search for Smooth981, you can catch the live stream and post a comment on there as well.
All right, now, Abiodun, you mentioned the players in the the industries. Now, looking at the industries now, there has been pushback from some of those major players within the tobacco and the beverages sector. Now, is that pushback justified?
Okay, so basically, every business, before they go into a new financial year, they make projections, they make estimates, they make plans. Given the fact that the fiscal policy measure of 2022 had already prescribed the rates that were going to be seen in the year 2023 and 2024, you would expect these businesses would have made their plans, their projections, the profits they would be expecting to see in 2023. And I'm sure most of them would receive the shock of their lives when they come into 2023 and they discover that these rates have actually increased by 50% in some cases, by 100% in some cases. And these manufacturers, let's remember that they have their own challenge that they've been encountering. Let's not forget some of the challenges, such as the impact of the energy crisis that we've had, right, coming from the war in Europe, which has driven prices up, as well as the petrol scarcity, all those sorts of things, the currency redesign, which led to the crunch in the Naira. All these challenges are there existing, and the manufacturing companies actually need help. You can see some of their results in terms of profitability. They've actually been on the decline. Even the National Bureau of Statistics, the Q3 reports for 2022 made us understand that the tobacco, the beverage sector actually suffered a decline, right? They went in the negative. So at this point in time, for them to push back, yes, to some extent, it does seem reasonable. I understand that the government is trying to some extent, part of the reasons why the fiscal policy measures are even in place is to also discourage consumption of some harmful products. But then it begs the question that to what extent is government going to even use this revenue that it's going to get from the increase in these the increase in excise duties on these items? To what extent is government going to channel this amount into a fund that will be used to benefit those who suffer from excessive consumption of these items? So if you look at different countries like developed countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, there is always a fund that the government has anytime they impose such taxes. The money is generated from these taxes will be channeled into that fund and will be able to cater to the needs of those who are suffering from excessive consumption. But in Nigeria, do we have that? I guess you all know the answer to that question. So you might say it's reasonable for manufacturers to push back on this.
I think you did raise some key issues on your PWC review of the policy measures. Now, on the excise duties, you did point out no basis for computing them. So what is the issue there? Is it a lack of clarity, perhaps?
Yes, you're correct, actually. So it actually has to do with clarity. So, a lot of times we see governments probably come up with some policies and provide clarity later. So the thing is, with the introduction of this FPM, there is no clarity with respect to single-use plastics, for instance, how the excise duty would apply. So your single-use plastics, which is one of the grain taxes that has been introduced by this FPM 2023, they refer to items such as, when you go to your retail supermarkets, the bags you get in carrying most of the products that you purchase, right? So those are some of the single-use plastics that we have, and also some of the bottles that are being used for your drinks. Those bottles that you can, disposable bottles, plastic bottles, right? So those are also examples of the single-use plastics. So the thing is, some of the products that are being contained in those plastics themselves, some of them are also subject to excise, some are not. So for those of them that are subject to excise, there is no clarity on whether the taxes would apply on the plastics themselves, or it would apply on both the plastics as well as the item that is going to be contained in those plastics. So that sort of clarity, that sort of illustration is yet to be provided. So that's what we meant there.
All right, now talking about taxes, there are green taxes on these single-use plastics and certain vehicle categories, but your report says there is no legal basis for this tax. Can you explain this a bit further?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. Okay, so we have something referred to as the Customs and Excise Tariff Act. So there you see items that are going to be subject to excise duties. So what we have is that there are always laws being passed by lawmakers, the legislative arm of government. By the time they pass these laws, those laws can then introduce further items that will be subject to taxes under the Customs and Excise Tariff Act. So I'll give you two examples in that article which we have. The first one had to do with telecommunications. So the Finance Act of 2020, the Finance Act is a particular document, legal document that helps to amend different forms of taxes, right? So the Finance Act of 2020 introduced telecommunication services, right, as items that will be subject to excise duty. So that was introduced into the Customs and Excise Tariff Act. So also the Finance Act of 2021 introduced non-alcoholic drinks, carbonated as well as sweetened drinks. It introduced this also into the Customs and Excise Tariff Act. So for these particular single-use plastics as well as the motor vehicles that the grain taxes will be collected on, they've not been introduced into the Customs and Excise Tariff Act. They've not been introduced yet. So without that introduction, there is really no legal foundation for the imposition of such taxes. That's exactly what that article is trying to say there.
You're listening to Business Express on Smooth 98.1. Our special guest this morning is Abiodun Kayode-Alli. He's an economist and tax manager at PWC. And we're talking about a review, basically, of Nigeria's 2023 fiscal policy measures. Abiodun, your reporter mentioned the lack of an impact assessment. And we've actually seen this with the Naira redesign and how negatively it actually did impact the economy. Why? Okay, can I say, I'm trying to think of a nice way to phrase this, but why doesn't Nigeria generally carry out impact assessments before moving forward when it comes to some policy decisions?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So yes, you're right. The Naira redesign was one issue. So I think we found ourselves in a situation whereby probably there is a lot of pressure. There is probably a lot of pressure to generate revenue, right? There's a lot of pressure to, and one thing that the government mostly thinks about when it comes to revenue generation is taxes, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. So I think that's something the incoming administration should probably think about, because apart from the Naira redesign you spoke about, I'm sure you would remember sometime in 2019, we had the issue with the closure of the borders, right?
Yes.
Sometime in August 2019. And that was just like 3 months after we had signed on to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, right? So, and the main reason why they did that back then was because they wanted to promote local production and consumption. But we saw that prices went high and things went in the negative, right? So I think it's something the government probably needs to consider, especially the incoming administration. Like I said, I think the reasons why we probably do this is pressure to generate revenue and not having, I think it's just pressure either locally and also probably internationally from international organizations that try to encourage Nigeria to come up with some of these measures. Those are the responses I can give to that question.
Now, this same question actually, extends to this lack of stakeholder engagement, which was also mentioned in your reports. Now, does the federal government feels that, okay, it knows what best to do without, engaging in stakeholders or deciding when to engage and not to engage with stakeholders?
Well, I can't really respond to the federal government, but one thing I can say is that the lack of engaging stakeholders has actually backfired in many respects. But one thing I could also give kudos to the government for was, if you remember, in December, we had the Finance Bill 2022 that was passed by the National Assembly, and there was no stakeholder engagement for that finance bill, even though our national tax policy encourages stakeholder engagement. But one thing we could give kudos to the government was that the federal government did not assent to it because there were some provisions that had a negative impact on some certain industries, right? So the lack of engaging stakeholders, what it has done in the past is that it has led to the production of policy measures that has not favored the country, right? Either the government or businesses or individuals. So I think that's something that is of concern. And I think it's something that the incoming administration should actually take note of.
Speaking about the incoming administration, will the next administration be forced to borrow to fund the budget, or is there any other way out? We've got about a minute left.
Okay, a quick response to that would be borrowing, like has always been said, is not bad in itself, depending on what you actually use it for. Given the financial challenges that Nigeria is currently in, there might be that inclination to actually borrow. but it then boils down to what exactly would those borrowings be tied to. I think what the next administration should consider should be more of trying to discuss more with stakeholders, businesses, see exactly what they need and see how it can help them to achieve what they actually want. And in doing that, we'll see that there will be prosperity. And from prosperity, there will be taxes that could be generated to fund most of these things that we require. So that's my quick response to that question.
All right, thank you very much for that response. And thank you, Abiodun Kayode-Alli, for being with us on Business Express this morning. He's an economist and tax manager at PWC. Do have yourself a great day ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Hayo. Thanks, Zibby. Thanks for having me.